afternoon, everybody. This is the work session for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for March the 25th, 2025. This meeting is officially called to order. I'm going to call the roll. Alderman Barnhill.
Present.
Alderman Blanton.
Here.
Alderman Caesar.
Here.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
Alderman Berger.
Present.
Alderman Brown.
Present.
Vice Mayor Potts.
Present.
Alderman Baggett.
Present.
And the mayor's here also. Next opportunity for citizen comments. I have no speaker cards, so we'll continue to move on. And I think Mr. Stuckey wants to make an introduction of Melissa Ryerson.
I'll make
for
a
little
quick introduction.
presentation.
We have a new city team member we want to introduce you to. And this is a team member that virtually works all the time. Right, Melissa?
Right, that's right.
Let's introduce everybody to our new team member.
This team member was created virtually with AI in Canva, and we teamed up with CityBot. They are a leader in AI-powered chat solutions for local government. And so we have a 24/7 web chat assistant named Frankie that you're seeing on your screen right now. And we thought, who doesn't like owls? And who is a fun word to use. And, Stephen Price likes a lot of puns. So we use that with our chat. So this will show up on every single page, the little AI Ask Frankie. And then, of course, he says, hi, I'm Frankie, and I'll be your virtual guide. And for city information, so he answers questions on virtually anything that's on with the website. And so I thought I'd give you a little example. So one of the things that people write in about is, I want to report a pothole. And so now you can see what Frankie says about that. And so he said, you can report a pothole in Franklin, Tennessee by visiting our website. Please use the following link to access the pothole reporting page. Report a pothole. This will guide you through the process of submitting your request. Is there anything else I can do or help you with? And so how about, I want to know who my alderman is. I'm just saying, I want to know who my alderman is. Because not anyone knows that they can put their address in and find it. So not many people. But, all right, it says to find out who your alderman is, you can use the Who's My Alderman interactive map provided by the City of Franklin. You can access it here, so people could just click there. This map will show you the city services and the alderman and who represents your neighborhood. Do you all have a question you'd like to ask?
So is that, when you say click here, that's a live link that takes them straight to that page?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to see that, or? Okay.
It takes us.
Let's-
That's helpful because then they don't have to go searching.
Yeah.
I like that.
It takes them to the ArcGIS page,
Cool.
and then you just put your information there.
And this gives them all their services. They can see when their trash pickup day is. It goes through everything in terms of the information that's based on their address and their services.
When is my trash pickup? And we did a soft launch over the weekend, and we've done soft launches with our city team, and everyone's been trying to test it and outsmart it any way they can. And I think we've.
What if you ask it something like, when is the Christmas tree lighting? When it's like April.
Oh, I don't know that we put that date in there yet, so it could only put information. Let me see.
That's why I'm wondering, because it's so far out. Wonder what it tells you.
2025. I don't think we've listed the date yet, but we'll see what he says. Well, I put 2/25. Sorry. Friday, December 6, 2024. That was the last time.
Got
Okay,
it.
when is it in 2025?
You did it again.
Right.
You're doing dashes.
2025. Let's see.
I love it. So Melissa hadn't told us yet.
Yeah, basically that's what it says.
It says, I'm not sure what
Okay.
specific event or date you're. Could you please provide more details? So, yeah, and if it really can't answer your question on a few tries, it will give you a phone number to call. So we do connect it with a person if it cannot answer your question. But it's been pretty, before Alderman Blanton stumped it, it has been pretty good with answering questions.
Yep.
Yes, yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Great. Well, welcome to Frankie, and it'll be there for people 24/7.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, let's go to item number 1, which is event permit for Franklin on the 4th, sponsored by the Franklin Lions Club in downtown Franklin on July the 4th. Imagine that. Any questions about that one? Keep moving along. Item number 2 is event permit for rodeo parade sponsored by the Franklin Noon Rotary Club in downtown Franklin on May the 10th, 2025. Any questions about that one? We'll go on to item number 3, which is discussion regarding the Franklin Rodeo's 75th anniversary and sculpture.
Alderman Baggett, do you want to lead it off, or do you want me to? We'll
I'll be
have
happy
a
to.
team that's been working on this with the Rotary Club, so take it away.
So a few months ago, I guess it goes back a little bit longer, as the 75th Franklin Rodeo comes up next year, 2026, was thinking of some ways that we might be able to commemorate this long-standing Franklin tradition, one that has had a tremendous community impact in the likely approaching $10 million plus of contributions back to the nonprofits in our community based off the proceeds of the Franklin Rodeo. It's put on 100% by volunteer work from the Franklin Noon Rotary Club. And really just has a rich tradition. One of those things when we talk about preserving Franklin's character, this is one of those was kind of key events that have been going on for a long time that just has had when you meet people that have grown up in Franklin, the Franklin Rodeo certainly was a part of their story here. So SALT brought the idea forward to staff, and staff came back and had a very nice proposal, and I appreciate staff and Eric and Lisa and the whole team for really knocking this out of the ballpark and providing something that's really special. So, without further ado, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. And we've got guests here behind me from, I think, the board. And so, as Alderman Baggett shared, it was about looking at the history and a proposal for a statue within our great community. And so one of the things that they had shared is the city administrator charged staff with taking a look at what are some of the different areas that might be the best location for. And so when you take a look at that, it kind of became obvious that every picture that would suddenly come up when we began to look at the rodeo is the parade. I mean, that's where you kind of start that, not just the event itself. If you Google it today, you see a lot from the Ag Center and that type of thing, but you saw a lot of the historical parade. And so from there, we began to look at, well, where did it? When I came to Franklin in 2002, and I went to, that's one of the first events. I came in April, and I went to the parade, in fact, I worked the event at Jim Warren. And because the parade is where it was staged. And to this day, that is where the parade is still staged. And this picture, this aerial picture here, this picture was from when I came. These are one of the first aerials that we had. This is prior to, this is Culberson Avenue. Boyd Mill ran through here, but it looked a little different because this was the old rodeo grounds. And that was one of the first things I was charged with because it had just moved to the Ag Center. It was brand new. And so this kind of provides you of the framework of our infrastructure of it today. And so this section that was part of the rodeo grounds, this was the entrance. People parked over here. They entered. They actually placed a fence around this part of the park, and they entered the old rodeo grounds. And if you rode in the parade, then you got to ride through the old rodeo grounds. And so that was very meaningful, and so many people shared that with me during that time frame. Well, in saying that, this is what it looked like as well. It would be great to have this location today, but now we have lacrosse and we have football and the thousands of coaches and children that play in this area. But this gives you an idea of where it was and what it looked like for them. The proposal is to, when it was brought forth for the sculpture is to maybe look at where could a permanent home for the sculpture be, and bring awareness of it every single year. And so one of the things we talked about as our team was, can you bring it home? And home for many years was at Jim Warren Park. The proposal is to create not just a place for the sculpture, but create a park within Jim Warren for the rodeo, because that is where the history has been told. This is 1.4 acres. It can be seen from 96. It can be seen from Boyd Mill Avenue, and you can kind of see the location. It's very prominent, and it's open space where we have right now. It also, if you go out there today, that's where we actually have the historical marker for the Franklin Rodeo. That started in 1950, and it was in the 1970s where it stayed there until it moved in the early 2000s to the Ag Center. And again, it has this particular proposal. It already has pedestrian capabilities through this site. And then if you add the potential statue, and with the right landscaping and the right vision, we believe this could turn into something in which every time the rodeo comes to town, that when they're staging for the parade, they also have a wonderful place to stage for their sponsors, for children, for those that are on the horse. And I think that's an amazing thing. So this is one of the potential, just as a very high-end idea, high-level idea, is that you create the statue, create a few more pedestrian accessible areas, but also allow that the horse can come onto this site as well. And then as a tradition in the rodeo, they also do a lot of flags with their sponsors, but also with the Rotary, City of Franklin, State of Tennessee, and the United States flags. So creating a place to where maybe potentially you could have flags during that week, or also during while the statue and light that area. So this just kind of gives you an idea that this would become a location. The rodeo is still there today. It still is, those are the memories of so many locals in this area. And it allows for the Noon Rotary in that area to incorporate interpretive signage, maybe tell the story of the history. And as we do that, I work with in our battlefields, we can also interchangeable take those stories, replace them, tell another story, tell another part of the history over time. And so we're happy to answer any questions, and I believe members are here to answer your questions.
One quick thing I would just add is our anticipation is that our ability, as either through staff or through our existing on-call contracts, that we can deliver the elements of this park, including sidewalk, access area, lighting, other components that can largely be delivered either by staff or with the existing contracts we have for sidewalks and pavings and that kind of thing. So really what we're looking for is your guidance that it's okay to dedicate more staff time to develop this plan more completely with our partners at the Franklin Noon Rotary, and bring back to you a more fully developed concept. But this is a great concept. I compliment Lisa and the team for bringing it together, and we're excited to bring it to you today. And glad to answer questions. And we have folks from Noon Rotary and from the rodeo here to speak to it from their perspective as well.
I keep looking at Alderman Peterson tonight because she scolded me last time for being the last one called on.
If
Is
you want to have
everybody
them-
good to move forward? They're excited about the concept. And Alderman Blanton?
Well, I mean, obviously, thank you, Lisa. I was one of the marching bands that spilled out into that bowl with the glockenspiel on my back for 4 years. So I definitely have fond memories of that. But curious, I know originally that y'all had a different thought in mind. I know what the city wants. I'm curious to know if the Rotary is on board with this location. And that might be the hard question, but yeah, I'm asking.
Yeah, what we think the historical significance of the location really opened up a whole new avenue of thinking that we hadn't really considered. So we're grateful for the opportunity and ready to collaborate with everybody.
Yeah, we brought this forward because there was a meeting of the minds that this was a great way to tell that story.
Well, an initial,
So we would not have brought it to you if they hadn't been on board.
Right, I understand. I just know initial thoughts. It was a different location, so I'm just making sure we're all on the same page. I do think it's a great opportunity for you all to have the infrastructure provided in the way that is being proposed here. And it is still the staging area for the rodeo, and I imagine it will be in perpetuity. So I think it's a great opportunity.
You have a comment, Alderman Barnhill?
No, I was just asking if it was, I was thinking if it was another site, but you're satisfied with this site right here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Did you have any other comments? And I see Pat Dunn and Charlie Fox in the audience as well. Excuse me. Long history in the rodeo.
No, we're grateful for the opportunity. We're prepared to carry our weight on this. We've prepared a small committee out of our club to work on this in regards to the legal standpoint, the financial standpoint, the artistic standpoint, and this historical standpoint. So we're trying to cover all bases there and work with Lisa and her team and the city to make sure that everything is done top notch and high quality. That's the way we like to do things at the rodeo. So that's no different here. So.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll keep moving on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion regarding development of employee housing opportunity for the City of Franklin employees.
I'll say a few introductory comments. This is an idea, concept that came to us from one of our citizens. Dorinda Carlisle Smith approached us a while back about the potential of a housing opportunity for city employees. And we want to give her a chance to kick this off with her interest and passion and what drove this offer. And then we'll talk through some more specific details and get some additional guidance from you. But
Yeah, just don't ask me about the rodeo back when I was a kid, because it was before it was at the Jim Warren Park. You know, I was really lucky to get to go through the Franklin Government Academy a few years ago. And the one thing that stood out for me from that experience is, to a person, every employee that spoke with us was so proud of the job they did. They were so proud of the department they worked for, and they were really proud to be a City of Franklin employee. At the last session of that academy, I asked Eric, so what is the percentage of employees that live in the city? And he told me less than 20%. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why city employees don't live in the city. Maybe they, want to be closer to family. Maybe they want more land or space. And there are other reasons. But I bet the number one reason people that work for the city don't live in the city is because they can't afford it. Now, I've been thinking about this issue over the last couple of years. And, I inherited land from my dad, who bought the land in 1946 when he came back from World War II, because it was adjacent to land that my grandfather bought in 1922, and they both farmed it until they either were dead or unable to farm anymore. And of this 14 acres that is remainder, there's 5 acres, roughly, that provides no value to anyone other than the guy we pay to mow it once a month in the growing season. So I started thinking, what if we put townhouses on this land for City of Franklin employees? And what if we actually made it deed restricted so only City of Franklin employees could own these townhouses? And what if we developed workforce housing so the City of Franklin employees who work so hard to make Franklin extraordinary actually get to live in the city? So about 15 months ago, Matt, who is my ward alderman, and I met with Eric to kind of float and see what the gauge of the city interest might be in this. And since then, we've had a couple of meetings to further discuss it. And every time we meet, I get more excited about the possibilities of this opportunity. I know that my parents, Derry and Walter Carlisle, who many of you don't know, and Peterson certainly does, who were very involved in this community, would be very proud to think their land could be going to support the employees that make this city so great. And I know I would be proud as a person from Franklin, a person who will die in Franklin, that I would be proud to have City of Franklin Fire and police and other employees as my next door neighbors. So to further discuss this, I'm going to turn it over to Dylan or Eric. I'm not sure which one's going to do the
both
handoff.
be part of that, and thank you so much for being so thoughtful and kind towards our city team members. This overview touches on some of the things that Dorinda talked about, this opportunity to look at 6 acres, the fact that under 20% of our city team members now live in Franklin, and that number goes down every day because it's just hard to find housing for folks that are our employees. This is not an unusual issue. A number of communities deal with this. Dylan did some research. He can speak to some of that. And there has been some efforts in other places to try to address this that have similar challenges. We've learned some from that. We also think there's some unique wrinkles to what is here. We believe that this could accommodate up to 20 housing units. I'll let planning staff talk a little bit about how that fits in terms of our rules, regulations, and existing land use standards. I think Emily's going to touch on that.
Good evening, everyone. Just to kind of run through this conceptual layout, planning staff, we first looked at the zoning for this property, which is estate residential, and then we went to Envision Franklin to see what long-term policies really would guide for development at this property. So this is in the neighborhood green design concept, which does have calls for 60% set aside of open space, but it also allows for a mixture of housing types. So Annette Dalrymple in our department drafted this plan, and it allows for a maximum of 10 townhome units and 10 duplex units. So you'll see the townhomes in the darker gray, duplexes in the lighter gray. To accommodate the parking, there's 20 garage spaces, so each unit would have a 1-car garage, and then there's 40 parallel spaces along the local street that circulates throughout the site. There's a little pocket park towards the end of the townhome units, and there's a big green landscape open space planned towards the road where we have the scenic corridor overlay that runs along that part of the property currently. This would require a rezoning to the plan district, so that would have to go through the process, go to Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then 3 readings by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to rezone and to approve the development plan. But this is a drawing of what we think could be accommodated on the site. We really looked at trying to maximize the number of units on the site, but also really follow all of the regulations that are already called out in this design concept of neighborhood green to see what can be done under our existing policies. Happy to answer any questions at the end if you have any.
So I did a little research into other local governments with similar employee housing interests, and the commonality in these communities was high median income. And so 2 main solutions occurred to this issue. The first was rental units, and so they used a property manager to manage on behalf of the local government and provide rental opportunities to their employees. The second option, which aligns with what Ms. Smith has interest in, is the deed restricted housing units for only local government employees. And so this requires a program administrator to act as the mediator in the sale and resale of units, also so there's no conflict with the employer-employee relations and having the homeownership involved in that relationship. So the goals kind of across the country with these programs is the preservation of housing stock and the provision of homeownership opportunities to employees. So as Ms. Smith said, this is to promote homeownership. So these 20 townhomes would be for homeownership only. And then there's 2 paths that have to be navigated to kind of oversee the development of an opportunity like this. The first path is program administration, so finding the partnerships and the financing opportunities to allow for development and the overall management once the units are built. And then the second being site development, which is the physical construction of the units.
So as we move forward, and what we ask for you tonight to give us guidance on is, are you comfortable with us dedicating some additional staff time to flush this out? Looking at what this might look like and how this might come together, respecting Ms. Smith's guidance here that she wants it for city employees and she wants it for home ownership. So with those guiding principles, what does that look like? With your approval, we look at developing components of that. We would sort of get a proof of concept that there is interest among our city employees to have a home ownership opportunity in Franklin of this nature. So we would look to survey employees to gauge that interest, and then look to do some outreach, maybe look at a letter of interest type of component for this program administration piece and the development partner piece, that then we could start to talk with folks who really work in this space and how this might fit, and then look at how we define a process going forward. There may well be a role for the Franklin Industrial Development Board in helping us navigate and set up this structure. So that's something to think about. And then just overall look at the different roles. This is a unique concept. While Dylan found some things that are touch on this topic, I don't know that there's anything that is an exact translation to what we're talking about here. So we'll need to talk about what are our roles, how would this work, the role in terms of property ownership, home ownership for these employees, and how all the different details would work as we go forward. So this is really where we are with a pretty broad concept, but looking at what's been offered and how we move forward, and get your guidance tonight if you're comfortable with us investing some more time and effort to basically flush out these details, bring some questions and concepts to you, and continue to move forward on how it might come together.
I've got Alderman Peterson, then Alderman Barnhill, then Alderman Brown. So just let it show on the record that you were not
Number
last.
one. Thank you. Thank you. Well, two aspects that just came right at first to me. What happens if then, after the person buys this, then they are no longer employed by the city?
Yeah, that would be something we'd need to work out those details in terms of how the deed works, and at what point is there a vesting or a time frame by which they would need to, move out, or do we grant that if they retire as a city employee that allows them to stay? There are details we would need to work through and think through about how that fits with the goal that it is supportive of employees in the whole.
And also resale, there too. So whether they could continue to live there if they're no longer an employee, and the other thing would be how you resale something like that. Would have to be only to another?
Yeah, we do have some experience with resale and some of the deed restricted workforce units that we've done through CDBG money and some of the other partnerships. And that does provide for a structure that keeps it in that workforce housing range, but does provide for the ability to accrue some benefit of home ownership over time as well. One of the other things Ms. Smith didn't talk about, but she has a rich career in the mortgage lending field, so it might be a helpful resource as we talk about that as an opportunity for our employees as well.
Well, this is certainly a very interesting idea and project, and I do think your parents would be very interested in it themselves.
Thank you, Ann.
Alderman Barnhill.
When you ask the question, the interest from the board in pursuing this, I have an interest in pursuing it, but I think we've got a ton of questions to ask and to be resolved before we pursue it too far. Okay? For instance, and Dan touched one or two of them then. For instance, who is building these?
Well, that's part of what we would flush out in this process. The letter of interest might identify a development partner. And so that would be part of this process, is looking at who is our, because the city's not in the business of building
City's not in the
homes.
business of building.
So who would be our development partner would be part of what this process would be designed to identify. And how would that relationship work?
And the city's not in the business of providing infrastructure for a development that hasn't been developed.
That would all be part of the development concept and how all that comes together.
And, okay, if the board.
It's in early times and there are a lot of elements, but we needed to bring it to you to let you know what we have come up with, that at least that the concept could work and what could work on the site that's been identified, and then get your guidance before we invest a whole lot of additional staff time and effort. We want to make sure you're comfortable with us doing so.
And I do think you need to do the survey of the employees who are interested in living in a unit such as that right there. And I'll say this in all fairness. We've done surveys in the past, and we did a survey at CPS years ago, and it shut down 20 years ago. And there was relatively little interest in people that were commuting to come into to CPS. There was relatively little interest in doing that. They were satisfied in commuting. They were satisfied living where they were. And but I think that could be the very starting point right there as to whether or not you've got interest for them employees or not. And it needs to be some kind of fairly firm interest that they would be interested in that then. But as far as I'm concerned, if you want to proceed with it and keep us abreast on what we're doing and how we're doing it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I think we anticipate that the employee survey would be one of the very next steps to sort of validate the level of interest. But yeah, agree with you there. Thank you.
I've got Alderman Brown, followed by Vice Mayor, followed by Alderman Berger, and then followed by Alderman Baggett. I appreciate that humility down there.
I think all fair questions. Very early days. My two comments are this. One is, I think, we talk about trying to address affordability, and we are typically faced with either having to use land that we already have and have already invested in, or we're coming into the tail end having to make investment by spending millions of dollars on the back end, or waiving fees and trying to make a dent in a way that's just not sustainable. And I've long said we need landowners, we need developers, we need people on the front end of things to make it affordable for us to get to that place. And I think it's worthwhile for us to at least explore it. Again, fair enough on the fair questions, but we finally are starting from a place that's the originator. It's the landowner who's willing to come to the party and say, hey, I've got the asset and I'm willing to be the originator of the idea of starting with affordability. And I think that's worth chasing down, and that's what makes this opportunity unique. And that's worth the due diligence in and of itself right there, to try to figure out where this thing could go. So I applaud the heart, and I think that takes a huge chunk out of it right there for me, for sure. And I think you're right, whether the employee survey says that or not, I think too, we're just seeing it push out. The growth is pushing out and the affordability is pushing out. And it's getting to the point where Spring Hill and Murfreesboro and everybody else is getting unaffordable. And at some point, you're going to have to drive a whole long distance to live in an affordable place and work in the city. And if we don't find solutions here closer, that commute will get just impossible. And so, but all fair questions for sure.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Dr. Mayor. Ms. Smith, thank you so much. It's great that someone with your that's all. With your family's history is willing to step forward like this. Alderman Brown just did a great job of kind of putting this into perspective. I know that the Housing Commission, this is something that we talk about every single time that we meet. And I just applaud you for your passion, for your heart being in the right place and wanting to do that. I do think that there are a number of questions. And
without a doubt.
Yep. And we
I
will
have
work.
tons of questions.
Yes.
Exactly. but they'll all be worked through. And so I'm in support of moving this forward right now and going down that path. There are a couple of concerns, but I think that with the proper people at the table, we'll be able to address everything, because we're not going to get the land again, and you're bringing that to us. And so, again, we thank you for doing that.
Alderman Berger, you're up.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I love this idea, and I think there's a lot of potential here, and I'm very interested in it. I know a lot of these questions will be flushed out. I mean, there's probably, like you said, you have them, we have them. This is just the start of it. And but I would say, I think back to when we approved Grant Park. Emily, you will know this if I'm wrong. I know the number of units, but I believe it was only 10 acres. I think it was only 10 acres, and everybody said, oh, we can't put that many houses and townhomes on that acreage. There's 51 units. If you drive around Grant Park today on McEwen, it's a fabulous looking little development. We have 51 units on 10 acres. So I'm looking at this going, we need to look at this in a better light if we want to build 20. I'm thinking we need to look at Grant Park, see how that was done. Maybe we can even enhance this even more. The other thing is, and I won't ask these questions because we don't have the answers for them, but how all this could be handled, we don't know that, but these things can be worked out. I'd like to know if we study other cities that are helping to do this. I know a lot of them do things such as in Dallas, they give assistance, closing cost assistance and things to their employees, but this is a whole different animal when someone's offering land to actually build homes. But growth of the city and growth of our employees as well as we grow as a city, I think opens up how we handle this, opens it up to lending itself to, could we get more units on this land? So I think those are really questions I would like to have delved into as we would move forward, and I'm all for moving forward. Thank you very much for your kindness.
Alderman Baggett, you're recognized.
Thank you. And again, I echo everyone's sentiments. This is a very generous thing and well received, I know, by staff and certainly by us. I would, it was a little bit, I didn't see this coming, as far as an opportunity for us. And so I have to think more about what that means for us as a government. I look at the legality of the Fair Housing Act. I think that's, if we do, which we should continue to look into, the first thing we should look into is if this is possible in a for sale situation legally with the fair housing. I did make a few phone calls with people who do affordable development and just trying to figure out, hey, is this, So I think my encouragement is it may not be the first iteration where it's for sale, city participate, city involvement, other than helping facilitate. But there is probably an iteration with public-private partnership, more private than public, I would hope, where this could be facilitated to some degree. I also keep thinking back to the Hill property. So we've already actually had an affordable project that had the land given to them that still was unaffordable without $5 million from us. And that was 37 units. So these are challenges. And I think we need to look into it. I just don't want us to recreate the Hill process where we got to the end of the line and they were for sale, attached housing, and they couldn't make the numbers work without us contributing $5 million. Or whatever it is now. I know that we're still working.
We're coming back.
Yeah, you're coming back. So it could be a different number. Mm-hmm. So we kind of already have a blueprint with something like this, very similar. And so I'm encouraged that we have had that experience. But not being for this would be kind of like saying like, oh, I'm not in favor of Christmas. Like, yeah, of course I want, of course I want for sale homes for city and Franklin employees. Yeah. Let's do it, but there are a lot of questions, and so I would support it, but reservedly, with a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Alderman Caesar.
Thank you, Mayor. Dorinda, I appreciate you bringing this to us. I think it's an interesting idea, and we should look more into it. And everyone probably has 16 or 20 different questions. This is one that I think is fairly fundamental that we need to answer as a board. And prioritizing our city staff's affordable housing over other individuals who live in the community, who work in the community, is something that I don't necessarily have a defined position on, but I think it's something we as a city need to think about. Are we going to say that our staff and them having a house here in our town is more important than others? And that's not speaking directly to this project that you've brought forth, but I think it's a question we as a board really need to get comfortable with. Everybody on this board probably would agree that affordable housing is something, or attainable housing is something that we need to be looking into. I had 4 calls today about affordable and attainable housing, so it's something that I'm certainly looking for solutions for. This may be it, and I'm supportive of us studying it, but I think we really need to answer that question. Should we be leapfrogging others in the community with the people who work here for the city?
Well, and I'd like to push back on that a little bit and say this is an and, it's not an or. We've helped with hundreds and hundreds of affordable units at Franklin Housing Authority, and that work is not going to stop. We're working on projects like The Hill. We're doing a number of other things. This is additive to that with a specific focus that a very generous property owner is willing to provide. So I don't see it as we're making a choice. We're adding to a broader work plan that helps address affordable and workforce housing. So I get where you're coming from, but I would remind anybody who thinks of it as we're putting it in front of to say we've already done hundreds and hundreds of units with partnerships with Franklin Housing Authority, with CDBG money and infrastructure and other things we've put in that help them add units and rehab units that are in the affordable range. And this is just another piece of a broader puzzle.
Well, appreciate that. As I said, when I brought this point to the floor, I haven't answered the question yet. And I just have a concern there. And I hope that the folks in the audience would appreciate the response as well.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I think it's coming from a good place, but I want to put it in the context of all that we do.
Yep.
Alderman Black.
Dorinda, I say explore, explore, explore. Much like Matt, when we talk about trying to solve the affordable housing, and I've been doing this for a decade and a half, much less than you. I've often said it comes down to the heart of the builder. And I think another part of that equation is the heart of the landowner. And kudos to you, my friend, for having such a generous heart and wanting to find a way to creatively solve a problem. And I hope you feel that gratitude from all of us.
And I do, and I thank you all. And I'm a big dreamer. You can ask the mayor. He's gotten emails from me about some of my dreams. But I think that if this works in the way it is in my head, this could be just the first of others.
Agreed.
There are other landowners in the area. Frankly, there's one that's contiguous to mine that maybe they're inspired to do this, and maybe do it not just for City of Franklin employees, but maybe do it for workforce housing. So I appreciate your sentiments of letting us proceed with it. Thank you for not killing this dream, unlike the mayor that's killed a few of my others, but thank you.
Do you need to comment?
Well,
You don't want to talk about trash? Okay, I get it.
I really appreciate that Dorinda was the top honors from her Citizen Government Academy. We don't really rank you. We appreciate your interest in that. And then secondly, you serve on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and there's one other...
Industrial Development Board and the Board of Housing, of Health, Education, and Housing.
And those are great spots for your talent, and we appreciate the heart that you bring this tonight. So,
Well, frankly,
and I do read your emails.
okay, you forwarded it. Thank you.
Okay.
Quick. So I had a client a number of years ago that I had to do some research on fair housing for. So I pulled up one of my links and just double checking. It says under the Fair Housing Act, a city can build and sell housing units for its employees. but it must not discriminate against any person based on race, color, religion, sex, familiar status, national origin, disability, in the sale or the rental of the units. So that just gives me a little glimpse into there's something here that's probably, that we can investigate further. But I just want to pull that link up. And then in Tennessee, it's the same thing. That Tennessee law, in addition, says the same identical thing.
And this is one of the initial questions that we got into in terms of legality and ability. And I think, I want to speak for Shauna, but one of the things we saw is there's a lot of latitude given to a private property owner choosing to put certain deed restrictions on their property. And that's essentially what's going on here. So doesn't mean there aren't lots and lots of details to work out, but that seemed to be a pretty strong point that took us down the road to go further in at least developing this concept for you tonight.
All right, we need to keep moving along. Item 5 is a presentation of Safe Streets and Roads for All SS4A Safety Action Plan.
So we have folks coming forward from our traffic engineering team and consultant that's worked on this. We've done a lot of outreach with the community, and we're going to share some of the results of that work with you tonight.
Good evening, Adam Mosier, City Traffic Engineer. Glad to bring this presentation forward to you. As you know, last year we got a federal grant, a direct federal grant to the city for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Transportation Safety Action Plan. So what that does is that opens us up, once we have that action plan, to get additional funding from that program, from the federal program. So far that hasn't been cut. They still have $5 billion. They've spent almost $3 billion, so it's about $1 billion per year that they have allocated for this program. So we're really excited to present to you what the work we've done so far, and kind of present to you a goal that we're looking at for this particular effort. Take it away.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Kevin Tilbury with Kinley Horn. We're the firm that's been hired by the city to complete the study. So I also happen to be a Franklin resident as well, so I'm really pleased to be with here today. Let's start off by throwing out a quick question for you. Can you tell me, in 2023, how many crashes do you think were on city streets in Franklin, total? Anyone want to take a guess? Mayor, you've heard this before, so you don't count. You can't answer. 1,700 crashes were on city streets in 2023. Of those, 16 were a fatality or a serious injury. How many of those were acceptable? Right, none, right? None. So, which is the point of this plan, which isn't to say, though, that the city already does a good job. So the way that you've designed and laid out your streets, the way that staff enforces and maintains operations, we do better than most. There are pikes in Nashville that have 16 fatalities a year on them. So we're doing better than most, but we can always do better, right? Maybe next year it will be 10 serious injuries and fatalities instead of 16. So that's exactly where this plan comes in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the plan today. And Laura Beth is going to talk about what some of the recommendations of the plan are, and we do have a specific ask of you that we're going to ask you, a commitment that we're going to ask you to make as a city as well. So as Adam mentioned, this is part of an initiative by the Federal Highway Administration called the Safe Streets for All grant program, where the federal government said, okay, we think safety is one of the top priorities on our streets, and so we're going to incentivize local governments to pursue safety. And we're going to set aside $5 billion to do two things. One, to develop plans, and then two, to implement them. So your staff applied for and was awarded a grant to complete a safety action plan. And that's what we're presenting to you today. Now, there are components of the plan that we need to address in order to meet the requirements of the study. And this is important for a very specific reason, is that if we do a good job on the plan, then we'll get money to implement the plan. So we can go back this year and make an application to fund some of the projects that come out of the study. So it's critically important that we follow the different steps. So the first thing that we did is we engaged your staff. So the engineering department, police department, streets department, we wanted to make sure that they had input, because we're going to look at the data, but they experienced your streets on a daily basis so they can tell us some of the things that the data won't tell. So we established a committee to involve them, and they helped inform some of the recommendations, how we prioritize the projects, all those types of things. And that's where we land with the map that you see here on the right. This is what we call the high injury network. So this is what the data says. So the map on the left is a map of crash data, so the crash statistics that I just told you about. What the map on the right is a refinement of what that data tells us. This is our high injury network. So the streets that are highlighted, those are the worst offenders within the city, where we either see a high rate of crashes, injuries, and fatalities, or we see a lot of high risk behaviors or factors that could contribute to crashes. And this is what we organized our recommendations around, is this high injury network. So we wanted to do a couple of things before we finalized that network. We wanted to get input as well. So we engaged some of our partners in the community, like TDOT, Franklin Tomorrow, Franklin Transit. We wanted to get their fingerprints on it, to get their perspective. We also wanted to go out and talk to the community as well and see what they think and get their perspective beyond just what the data says. So we went to Family Day in the fall. We've been to Frank Talks and talked to them a couple of times. We had a survey that people could go on and complete, and then they had an online map. And the comments that the heat map that you see there are where we received a majority of the comments. So we got 800 responses to the survey, and we do these types of plans all over Tennessee and the nation. And I'll tell you, for a town this size, 800 responses is phenomenal. So we got really, a phenomenal level of engagement from the community. So we can say confidently that the community has their fingerprints on the plan. And then the other thing that we did is we wanted to make sure that we weren't ignoring our most vulnerable users in the community. So these are people that, the elderly that maybe choose not to drive, people that are low income, that maybe walking or cycling may be their only way of getting around, and other people who can't drive. And so we wanted to make sure that we were fairly addressing those communities as well. So that's a little bit of the background behind the study, behind the plan. I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Laura Beth, who will start to get into some of the recommendations.
Yeah, so what you see here on this next screen is what we started with when we started looking at, okay, how do we develop projects for these corridors that we've identified in the high injury network. And so one of the things we did was we looked at what types of factors are overrepresented in the crash data in Franklin versus the state as a whole. And these are some of the things that we found. You can see the driver behavior factors, aggressive driving, senior drivers, unrestrained occupants. Those were, aggressive driving was, a good bit higher than the statewide average. Roadway factors, intersections a little bit higher, not surprising because you guys are a city, have a lot of intersections, versus maybe the rest of the state as a whole. And the most interesting thing though is the at-risk road users, because that kind of showed us, we want to focus on bicyclists and pedestrians because those are, it's maybe not super significant, but it's elevated, it's higher than the statewide average that you guys are experiencing in terms of serious crashes with bicyclists and pedestrians. So that kind of gave us a starting point to start developing recommendations and develop projects to address these issues. And so like Kevin mentioned, we convened a steering committee that met several times over the course of the project to provide input. And one of the things that we asked them was to look at several criteria that would be used to prioritize the projects and help us pick which ones y'all want to move forward with first. What's most important to you? What are the criteria that are most important to you? So that will help us shape how the prioritization shakes out of the projects. And so these were the different variables that we looked at. You can see fatal and serious injury crashes, obviously, total crash rate, risky driving behaviors, equity, bike ped crashes, and then the public input. And so you can see the pie chart is just the distribution of the weighting that the steering committee members gave to those criteria. And so if you go to the next slide, using those criteria and or that weighting of those criteria, and through lots of collaboration with Adam and his team and with our steering committee, we had the full high injury network, which is a collection of about 30 corridors, but we wanted to figure out, you know, what are the top 5 maybe that the city could go after funding for first. And this was the list of the top 5 that we came up with. It wasn't just that we kind of had some back and forth about, well, okay, this one shows up higher in this category, but this one here is important in this way. And I want to emphasize though that like I said, we have about 30 corridors in the high entry network, and so these are not the only ones that are gonna get funding or could potentially get funding. They're just the ones that kind of floated to the top when we looked at everything. So we've got a little bit more detailed recommendations for these 5 that are in the report that you'll see when you get that draft. But we've got projects recommended for all 30 corridors, so all of them have different treatments depending on the crashes that are occurring in those areas and the needs of those different corridors. So this is just a little sample of one of the project fact sheets that we created for these segments. This is the one for this particular segment of Murfreesboro Road, and so you can see we identified the crashes that happened along it and some of the issues that we were seeing, the crash characteristics, and then we identified some recommendations to go along with that. And then another component of the safety action plan is to look at the city's current policies and processes and identify some things that might help to better prioritize safety through those policies and through those plans. And so we took a look at about 6 documents that you guys have as a city and identified how those currently align with transportation safety. So pulled out some of the goals that you currently have in those plans that are related to safety. And then we're working on developing some recommendations. That's about 95% complete. Some recommendations for how can safety be further prioritized within those plans. So the big thing that we would like to present to you guys tonight and get y'all's input on and buy-in is this leadership commitment. And so part of meeting the requirements for the safety action plan is that the leadership of the city commits to a reduction in fatalities and serious injuries on roadways. And so the ultimate goal is a long-term goal of 0. We don't have to put a specific year on that or a specific time frame, but we have to commit to an eventual goal of 0. And then you have to have some sort of interim goal that you want to meet that is going to be a reduction in your fatal and serious injury crashes. And so based on y'all's crash rate over the last several years, we looked at what the rates are doing over the last few years and how it's trending, and really it looks pretty good. You guys are on a downward trajectory, as you can see on this screen here. So the blue is obviously we only have data up through 2023, and so you can see the existing up from 2019 through 2023. It went up a little bit in 2023, but it was trending downward prior to that. And so if you guys were to stay on that trend line, essentially you would get down, pretty below 0.5 in the fatal and serious injury crash rate by 2040. But we think that's a little too aggressive, so we don't want to, commit you guys to something that you feel like is unattainable. And so what we would propose is a 20% reduction from the 2023 rate, which would get you to about 1.5 severe crashes per million vehicle miles traveled. And that's million vehicle miles traveled is looking at we're looking at the trend for the whole county as well, because that's the data that we have. But because there's so much growth in the county and in the city, that's what's really kind of driving that rate down. You have a lot of growth, but fortunately the crashes haven't followed that. And so your rate is trending downward, which is good. So that's what we would propose for your commitment. And so that's what you'll see when you get the draft report, that commitment is in there. And so I think if you go to the next, this is just kind of the next steps, like where we're at right now. We're at March 25th. We're doing this presentation to you guys. Our plan is to have the draft safety action plan submitted to Adam and his team by April 7th. And then the plan would be on the agenda for adoption by you guys on the 22nd. So, but really that commitment is the big thing we wanted to open up for discussion, see if you have any questions about that.
And I apologize for not introducing him. I should have said our consultants, Kimberly Horn and Kevin and Laura Beth, they've been doing an excellent job. And the plan, as you can see, the fact sheets look great. We're almost there. We just need our buy-in and commitment of reducing serious injuries and fatalities in the city. And I think with our growth rate, that's attainable if we gear ourselves towards safety in everything we do when we do infrastructure projects, thinking about that number one. And the FHWA is going to actually advertise another notice of funding opportunity, and that should be coming the end of this month or the beginning of next month. So we have a little bit of time. I talked to them, and they said as long as your plan is mostly complete, adopted by the time it's due, which it should be, we can actually go after implementation grant funding. So for some of these projects, so Nashville got a $5 million, I believe. Implementation grant fund, so they're doing some. They got one from the Fed, so that's something that we'll be looking at to try to get.
I'm somewhat familiar with this because I believe it's at the Transportation Policy Board we talk about setting transportation, accident reduction goals and so on. I'm kind of curious how this compares to that because I can't pull up in my mind all the metrics that we were using when we studied that. And maybe that's just
That's a great question. So yes, you're referring to GNRC adopted a goal, a regional goal, and we'll have to get back to you on that because I don't remember what it was.
I don't remember either.
Yeah,
but
that's a good question.
I think it's pretty conservative, and I think this is a good thing.
Generally those are pretty conservative, and so like I said, we didn't want to get too aggressive with it, but wanted it to be a noticeable, significant reduction that also feels attainable.
Well, the thing that I see on the news so often is pedestrian accidents, people being hit by cars in Nashville. And certainly you brought out the fact that, walkers and bikers and so on are targets that we can reduce incidences there. So I'm all on board. I don't know about the rest of the board. Everybody's shaking their heads. So,
Mayor, could I make just one clarification with the team in terms of what you see in next steps? That April 22nd is a board meeting, so would you bring forward a specific action of the board at that time to adopt the plan and specifically this goal that has been articulated?
Yes.
Would that be all rolled into one action for the board? Okay.
That's right.
That's required.
So if you're comfortable, we'll bring that forward for the second meeting in April.
And you'll have an opportunity to review it in advance.
Yes.
Yep.
Vice Mayor, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment, Dr. Mayor. On slide 7, this was one of your heat maps that showed the density of crashes right there. I'm excited to see that y'all are analyzing that area of 65 and 96. I know that there's been some improvements, but even recently I have seen with my own eyes and even had to call in our Franklin police where someone tried to literally walk down the middle of the road coming from east to west in that area. And so I definitely want to see what you recommend as far as sidewalks and safety and improving that entire area. I know this is it's a pain point for all of us. It's really the major artery leading in and out of our city. So thank you.
For sure.
So if you see the big yellow mark there, we might even hit that goal of 20% as soon as we close the median between Royal Oaks and 65. So we might have to come back with another goal, but I think you'll see that I'm hoping that whole yellow area kind of goes away.
Alderman Brown?
When you bring that plan, you said you have a project plan for each of the identified areas. Is there a corollary between an action plan that we might pick and what we might get funded, or is it just, hey, we're going to submit that we're going to make a promise and then we just get lucky with whatever they decide to grant us?
Correlation between the goal that you commit to?
No, like a specific project that we might pick.
There'll be specific project,
yes,
to get
I
funded.
got you. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep, that's correct.
Is that going to be, I'm sorry.
I've got Alderman Berger, and then I'll go to you, Alderman Baggett.
Well, is that?
Go ahead.
It was related to that. Is that going to be in the final plan? The project list that we're going to be So do we need to be looking at the project lists in each of the plan, and like giving feedback on that? Because once it's adopted, those top 5 are the 5. Does that
So
make sense?
you're not tied down to applying for those top 5 first with implementation. So I think that would be, I mean, if I think that's a discussion with Adam and his team, you know, when we get to that implementation grant. Okay, do we want to go for all of these top 5 here, or do we want to just pick one of these or 2 of these, you know, first? Or even though, okay, these were our top 5 that floated to the top through this criteria weighting exercise that we did, is there something else now that we're hearing, you know, for whatever reason needs to be bumped to the top? And so I think that can be hashed out when it comes time for implementation. So you're not tied down to that. I mean, there are all of these, you are tied to those 30. All 30 corridors are in the plan. And so any of those can be, you can pursue implementation funding for any of those equally.
We just better have a good excuse if it's not one of our top 5 why we're choosing it, because the feds will be, well, you did
Yeah.
a safety action plan and these are your top 5, why you want number 10, for example. So we have to be very careful with that, and it might be just implementing a certain solution on multiple corridors.
Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Beth.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I would think that we'd want to sort of stick to top 5, the ones that are more detrimental to our safety. This is the one we really need to go with. I just want to point out that Breckenridge neighborhood. I don't know how anybody
Gets out.
Yeah.
doesn't have an accident there every single day. That is horrible. And it's, you know, you're coming off, you know, past Matt Catcher on 96 or Matt Catcher turning right. And that's, I don't know how many people live in there, but it's not a tiny neighborhood. It's not huge, but it's got enough neighbors in there that need to have a safer way to get out of that neighborhood. So I would put that at number 1, because you've got residents with moms with little kids in car seats and dads with little kids in car seats. I see coming out of there all the time. So that's really a worry to me. It's always been a worry. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
We're ready to move on into item number 6. Thanks for the presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Fiscal impact analysis is part of the annexation request and plan of services process.
So we've been walking through a variety of different analytical tools and just ways to look at and think about development impact. And this is a deeper dive in terms of a financial analysis or assessment of development and its impact. So staff has worked on this. This was shared a few weeks ago with the Development Services Advisory Commission. And we wanted to share this with you as well in terms of another piece of the puzzle or another tool that we can look at in terms of understanding development and development impact. So we have Eric Connor and Emily here to speak to it. So I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you very much. Oh, okay. So this is similar to the potential staff housing situation. Staff has looked into this at a very preliminary stage, and so we're looking for some feedback from you all to see whether or not we should continue down evaluating something along these lines. And I'll give you a little bit of a history and some background on the work that we have done related to this, as well as just ask you for some feedback towards the end. So, as you all are probably aware, we are getting continued requests for annexation. Some of them are contiguous to our current city limits, and some of them are not. However, due to the rising infrastructure and service costs, we are now looking into studying the fiscal impacts of these annexations and whether or not we could have a ROI tool to really assist you all as decision makers as to whether or not it might be a good idea to annex properties that are further away from the city. And we have looked at this a little bit previously in the past when we were going through our UGB update and looking at the different drainage basins and what it would cost to service those drainage basins, as well as in the Goose Creek Basin. You can see on this right-hand photo. We have done very preliminary infrastructure costs and what it would cost to provide infrastructure into these certain areas outside city limits per developable acre. So this would be sort of along those lines, but could potentially be done as part of the annexation process. Recently, somewhat recently, the last large-scale fiscal study we completed was in 2006. This broke the areas into watersheds and existing county subdivisions because we did operate under a different set of annexation laws here in the state of Tennessee that did not require property owner consent. So we were studying the areas of larger areas of existing county subdivisions as seeing whether or not that would be feasible to annex those subdivisions into the city of Franklin. However, because we now operate under a different set of annexation laws that require property owner consent and request to be annexed into the city, we obviously haven't studied something like that in a long time. But this study did project revenues for the property taxes, business tax, shared state tax, franchise fees, water, sewer, stormwater, all of those revenues that could be brought into the city should these properties be annexed, as well as projected the costs for police and fire protection, refuse collection and disposal, and street and park maintenance expenditures. So staff evaluated this study and whether or not we could basically translate something like this into single property or multiple property annexations should they come and request said annexation into the city. Right now, just a quick little overview of our annexation and plan of services processes that we currently operate under. There is an application for a draft plan of services and annexation initiation, which goes to a BOMA work session and a BOMA reading. Now, if a property needs an Envision Franklin amendment, they could come in and request that. But based on the draft plan of services and annexation initiation process, should a property owner continue to want to annex into the city, they would then come in for a formal plan of services, annexation, and rezoning process. That would go to Planning Commission, a work session, and then 3 readings before ultimate approval. Now, our current plan of services is really basically highlights how the city of Franklin can provide services to this potentially annexed property, who will provide these services, and how will they do so. It currently lists our public and private investments that might be needed, but we typically don't assign costs to these because costs are always in flux, and it could be very possible that an annexation doesn't happen or a development doesn't happen, even if they are annexed, that it's really makes it difficult for staff to pinpoint what a price would be should we need to provide services and infrastructure. However, staff does highlight if maybe a new fire station would be needed or if a new police station would be needed, any new staffing that would be needed for that, any new equipment, that type of thing. But very rarely do we put a price tag on anything unless we give estimates for water, sewer, street improvements. But again, because they're more general and they fluctuate consistently, we typically don't pinpoint those numbers. So if we do decide to go down this route and put in some sort of ROI study, this could be a way for BOMA and Planning Commission to review realistic fiscal impacts for individual annexations, the revenues gained, the costs incurred, if we should decide to bring these properties into the city of Franklin. Now, staff has looked at our current annexation plan of services process, and staff believes that the most appropriate time would be to put this fiscal study into the early portion of the formal annexation and plan of services process. So they've already gone through the annexation initiation, gotten a feel whether or not the city would be interested in adding the property into the city. Any sort of Envision Franklin amendment would already have happened, so the development community would have a general idea on what potentially this property would be should it be annexed, because they have applied for whatever zoning they're looking to get. They have an Envision Franklin design concept, and so generally speaking, we have a better idea on what the property would be. So as we were going through this process, we did notice that Fate, Texas is a small DFW community that's rapidly growing, but they recently received an ICMA award for their commitment to fiscal sustainability with their most recent long-range plan. They developed a tool, a fiscal analysis spreadsheet tool that they do with pretty much every single entitlement process within their city. Now, obviously, this is further along the development process than we are looking at here with staff as part of annexations. However, they are a significantly smaller community with much tighter boundaries, so they're not dealing with nearly as many annexations as we potentially are. But they do it as part of an entitlement process. They really focus on whether or not a development would contribute or detract from the general fund, and they project a lot of sales tax revenue based on any potential development changes and entitlements that would happen on a property. So we took a look at this spreadsheet, and really we actually met with the folks from Fate Texas, and we're seeing if we could adapt something like this that they have been using for a handful of years to try to give us a head start in any sort of fiscal analysis that we would be doing here with annexed properties. So based on the previous study and the FATE study, we have collected this list of potential revenue from annexing properties. You can see on the left are the one-time fees that typically are involved with installation of different infrastructure aspects. And then the recurring fees, basically pretty much taxes and service charges should we provide infrastructure and services to these properties. We're still currently evaluating whether sales tax might be accurately forecasted. Since this would be at such an early time in the process, it's really hard to nail down exactly what type of use and how many square feet we would potentially be gathering sales tax revenue from if there's a commercial component. Additionally, we took a look at the costs incurred from annexing properties. Again, the one-time costs on the left and the recurring costs on the right. And we brought this presentation before the Development Services Advisory Commission on the 4th of this month. And just to get additional feedback from the development community before bringing that to you all, they were interested in this analysis potentially occurring earlier in the process, as well as an additional desire to just have the spreadsheet available online so that they could potentially use it while they are doing their pro formas and looking at what might actually make the numbers work. They were actually interested in utilizing it for their own purposes on the development side. They did voice a concern about how this could impact annexation and development decisions, and what weight this fiscal analysis might carry in the decision making. They mentioned that it adds additional uncertainty to the process for the applicants, and they do understand that the city needs to grow in a responsible manner, but they voiced hesitation and concerns regarding this specific tool. So at this point, I'm open for questions. We're looking for your thoughts and your feedback. Should you be interested in us continuing down this path and studying it further, our next step would be to continue developing this draft fiscal impact workbook. We could create a cost of service estimation for these existing neighborhoods throughout town. We would pick a few just to see really what a baseline would be for a purely residential neighborhood, as well as complete the workbook for recently approved developments, so that we could utilize that information again to potentially gather as a baseline should this go forward and we utilize it in the future. So I'm happy to answer any questions as well as gather feedback from you all.
The other thing I just add is you're getting ready for some questions. One of the things you're going to see at our next work session, Christine's going to present an overview and some initial policy thoughts related to residential improvement districts. That's something that's come up from the development community as an idea. It's a fairly new tool that has come from the state of Tennessee. I think something like this might be a helpful companion to that discussion. I don't know exactly what form that's take. Again, we're sort of working on this and developing this tool, but I think, you know, if you start to explore that, you're likely to have lots of folks want to use that tool. And I think you're going to want to have some method or way of differentiating impact and the nature of certain developments compared to one another, because I don't think you're going to use that tool on every single development. I think that would be a big lift and a big ask. So I'm not even sure you want to use it. So if you want to use it, this could be a companion to help you decide where to use it, potentially.
Alderman Barnhill.
Several screens you mentioned the infrastructure cost to the city. Explain to me what you consider that to be.
So typically, the infrastructure costs would be the one-time fee or the one-time cost of actually implementing and putting in the infrastructure that you can see on the recurring costs that we will have to maintain. So the road upsizing costs that potentially may be coming into the city. So we require our developers to put in the money for local roads, but if those road needs to be upsized, then the city pays a portion of that.
So this is kind of an added complexity in how we would set up a calculator. Most of our plans of services generally require the developer to extend the infrastructure or improve infrastructure as needed. While that may be a private investment piece from the development side, there is always the possibility that a development does stall. There are other pieces that the city may have to come in and provide at some point in time. So we might want to reflect those as private investment in the calculator, but those are still costs that are important in considering whether the development is going to be sustainable in the long term from a fiscal perspective. So it is an added complexity in how we would set the workbook up itself. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet because we're just talking about more high level at this stage. But there is a component of that we'll have to look into before finalizing any type of calculator or workbook.
You see, my thought on the infrastructure cost is that by and large, the developer does the infrastructure cost. He's responsible for getting it from point A to point B. The staff, you, us, we're responsible to make sure that he builds what we project the needs are. And that's for his development as well as future growth. Now, if we pay for the upsize on a road or the upsize on a sewer line or water line, I'm okay with that. That's not what we're talking about here. What we want to make sure is that I'm not going to pay for a road or a sewer line to go out to Murfreesboro Road and have to go a mile or 2 miles before it connects to the property, and the taxpayer that's living here now in Franklin is paying for that. That's not going to fly 100% on the board, I can tell you. So when we do the infrastructure costs and those comments right there, I'll make sure we understand what we're talking about, because the explanation is the city is not, that we may be out some, but we're not out the cost of the infrastructure itself. If we require infrastructure to be in place by the developer, possibly even stubbed out to his property line so future development can tap onto that if they have to. But that's what I look at as far as infrastructure costs. Now, new city facilities, he'll pay facilities taxes. New equipment, he'll pay facilities taxes for new equipment. So that one thing there, look at that closely and see if there's a broadening out of that, because I can't imagine when we're paying for development to run the something and to the development portion of whatever he's putting together and expect the city to pay for that.
And that has been historically how it's done, but as Eric Stuckey just mentioned, there are potential developments that are going to be coming down the pipeline that may be requesting other ways of funding their infrastructure. And how we calculate that in this tool can give you additional information in making decisions on whether to proceed with those annexations or not, if this is something you desire to look at.
Alderman Baggett, then I'll get Alderman Peterson. I hope you're not last, Alderman.
I mean, conceptually, this is great because we're going to be able to look at a particular development and kind of forecast the cost, long-term and initial, to the citizens. That's like in a perfect world. But I've already heard, and by the way, this is going to be a very complex spreadsheet. I'm really curious if there's not like another tool out there that might already do this. I mean, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. You'd think this is not an only problem that we have, and it's a very complex. I'm sure there's some tools out there, but maybe not exactly like this. Here's my concern. My concern is I've already heard like, well, we're going to have to be conservative about, or if we can even, we don't even know if we can estimate sales tax kind of revenues. And, you know, I see here on this Fate Texas one, it's the appraised value of the land is in there, and a projected value of the new development. Who's going to determine what the projected value of the new development is when we put it in the spreadsheet that you give to us?
Those are going to be required submittals from the developers. So we will be having to get that information from them. So there would be basically a form that the developer would have to fill out as maybe the first page of the spreadsheet, essentially, where it's just all the data that we would need to be submitted to us to then fill in the gaps, because we do not have that information readily available.
And that's good. I think the partnership, because then what we're going to also do is, that's on the revenue side, let's say. On our expense side, we're going to be, because that's how we are at the City of Franklin, conservative on the expense side. I mean, when you look at our CIP and you're seeing us go back and forth between federal funds and state funds, but we're looking at prioritizing a total figure. Like you already see, like where in this the developer's paying this portion and then we're paying this portion there. Like you can already tell that that's going to be hard for us to, like I'd want the net city impact, obviously. Would never want to look at the total, although I hear what you're saying, that is the total investment. The recurring should be pretty easily. It's a marginal cost. There's a marginal cost per additional dwelling unit that you can figure out. I mean, not easily, but it can be figured up, like for police protection and fire protection.
Sure.
And that should be pretty sustainable. I mean, predictable over time for the recurring, because it's not fair to put like that entire fire station on a single development, because it's not just going to serve a single development. There will be a marginal benefit to a lot of other people. How do you calculate that, right? I mean, you're not building a fire station or police, whatever it is, for one development. It's going to be the marginal cost of that, but we actually are going to have to build the whole fire station in this hypothetical situation. So I think it's great. I think that we don't need to be making decisions on a regular basis that are losing money. Right? I mean, we're not going in the right direction. The last thing I say is when I saw this, but also government exists to sometimes make investments in communities that don't make necessarily 100% business sense in the private sector. I say that very, very, hesitantly, because there are sometimes we make decisions that, like buying parkland, right? That's a fiscal decision that, yeah, so there's some tourism stuff that will come from that, but it's hard to make, if you spreadsheeted that out, your break even on a park is a long time, but your benefit to the community and the citizens is immediate, and it's massive, and you can't put that on something like this. So I think we need to be careful, and then just looking at that, at just the dollars and cents, although that is lion's share of importance. The last question is, why would Planning Commission need this? Is there any decision that they make that would, within their purview, that would require them knowing this? This feels like a BOMA decision.
They make a recommendation on the plan of service, the annexation, and the zoning of the property, and a development plan if that accompanies. So we always like to provide them with equal amount of information that you're going to see as well, because they're voting and recommending the same information.
But they're not making fiscal decisions for the city.
They're
so
not.
What is it? I mean, if they're all penny pinchers, then so they're not making fiscal decisions for the city, and so I think adding this is a layer of complexity that might not be fair to the development community.
So procedurally, kind of how we work anyways, is when a development plan, rezoning, annexation, and plan of service all come in as a group. we do our staff review and we prepare all of our materials that then go to Planning Commission, and then a week later they get on a BOMA agenda and they kind of go through everything. So it's already going to be prepared before it goes to Planning Commission. It is generally a good rule of thumb to give them all the information that we have available at hand. They're also making decisions on growth. So while it may not be solely a fiscal decision that they're making, we like to provide all those elements that play into wise growth decisions and how we eventually grow into our urban growth boundary and where land uses make sense and where they don't. And having the spreadsheet will show how the balance of land uses are going to sort out, which ones pay for themselves versus which ones don't. So I do think it is a really useful tool for both bodies to have.
Well, when the first time, and I say this respectfully, but to the Planning Commission respectfully, the first time one of them says, well, I like this, but you know, that math just doesn't make sense. I want you to touch your nose, because you'll remember this, is that they're going to start using this as, and it's going to add complexity to their decision, and it's not necessarily the things that they are getting to decide. They don't get to decide on who funds the infrastructure at the end of the day. They should be looking at the land use, the plan, the development plan. If it costs $100 million to move sewer somewhere, that's for BOMA to decide, the elected officials side. They've already got their Envision Franklin plan that casts that vision for where growth goes, and that we didn't use math to figure that out for them. And I just think it's going to add complexity, and a different relational complexity when they have this to look at. And if they're going to start making decisions based off, well, it's even, or well, it's we're losing $1 million on this one, or we're doing this, and then you're going to have all of us that are going to weigh in on that. I just think I'm not saying I'm against that. I'm just saying that relationship has got to be really defined, or else this could become an impediment, I think, or a complicating factor. But by and large, the people who are responsible and are accountable to the citizens for our budget and the money we spend and what we vote on to put into place that will ultimately cost this money, I really feel like that falls squarely on us. And not that they shouldn't be aware of it, but I don't know. I just think there should be very serious coaching on how they use it, or else it's going to get messy. And then we're going to be voting on things they don't recommend because of numbers that we have to decide on anyway. It's just going to make it a little I have no doubt we can figure this out, and staff can put together like a framework. But I just can see some confusion.
We need to move on.
Yes, please move on.
I would say
That's
the
very
Development Services Advisory Commission did bring up concerns about one of the things you mentioned earlier, and that is how this tool is used by not only necessarily Planning Commission, but the Board of Mayor and Aldermen as well. And when there's a plan proposed that advances goals of the city, how much weight does this carry versus those?
Yeah.
And that was one of the big concerns we heard. So I just wanted to clarify that as something Eric had mentioned earlier too.
It's a tool, not the tool. It is one piece of it, and we know the board is the decision maker on all those elements. But it's just good to have the information out for all to consider.
Alderman Peterson.
We were talking about infrastructure cost and that they would be paying for that. But on new city facilities, they're not paying for that. So that needs to be thought about, but separately.
Well, go ahead, Alderman Barnhill. You have a
That's not totally accurate, that the new city facilities, they pay facility taxes, and the taxes itself is what pays for the facility. What you don't want to do is tax the citizen that's already here to build that new city facility.
Okay, you got some direction? Semi-direction?
One of the points that Alderman Baggett hit on is one of ones that I really wanted to hit on again, is that our next step sounds like we are in favor of continuing forward with staff time on this, would be to get those estimations for our existing neighborhoods so that we can realize and
Let's
look
give you an
at
example.
that our baseline is not going to be zero. Realistically. So we will be happy to bring that forward once we have this workbook in a somewhat working, situation, and we can continue forward this conversation from there.
Okay, item 7 is regarding the 2025 water and sanitary sewer cost of service study and rate plan.
We'll try to move through this quickly. This is a follow-up to the direction you gave us a couple meetings ago, which specifically honed in on water and sewer, both rates and impact fees, with the target of a 5-year run-up and a 3-year kind of evaluation within that 5-year window. So we've worked out a more specific on what that would look like. I think our target was a $12,000 per SFUE at the end of that 5-year window. And we would look at this again at 3 years to see how it's performing and any adjustments that might be necessary. So we have our team here along with Fernando to take you through that. And again, we know our time is short, so we'll try to move quickly.
Hi everyone, hopefully this is the summary and final presentation from the 2026 rates and fee. Although I love coming here, so if you want me here back, I can always come back. We talk other things too. So this again is a summary of what we talked the last couple of meetings, and some of this information you already seen, but this represents kind of the final rates that we're proposing for 2026, 2027, and 2028. The idea is 3 years of increases kind of set. So in 2028, we come back, review how growth has been happening, our assumptions, how they look, costs, and everything else. So we reevaluate everything and redo the study and see where things are going. And hopefully we'll be on the same path or a better one. So again, go back one, sorry. So this was the summary of what the increases were and what we were talking about. Some of the increase in sewer were still in the air depending on the scenario of the impact fees, but based on the selection and decision to go to 12,000 in a 5-year, but stopping in year 3 and reevaluate it, which is kind of what we're putting in here, you'll have 2 years of 5.7 on sewer, 26, 27, and then 4.3, and then a reevaluation of everything. On water, we kind of haven't changed anything, it's just 6% from now, and part of that 6% is to make sure that you're meeting for the proposed increases that we're seeing or expecting from Arthur Valley, but also to make sure that we have net positive changes in the fund balance. That's part of a requirement that the state looks for the full utility, but we want each utility to look at it independently. So these are your current rates for water and sewer. You have 3 tiers on water with 1,000 gallons included in the fixed service charge. On sewer is again 1,000 gallons included in the fixed service charge, and 2 tiers, but the second tier is after 15,000. Almost no residential customer really falls into that one. On water is an increasing tier structure, so as you use more, you pay more. And in these 2025 rates, which are what is currently on your code, included an increase to the fixed service charge, 8.7 and 5.5 on water and sewer. So next. So the increase for sewer, and I'll probably show this slide before, this kind of helps me explain how your expenses are going to meet from different revenue sources. So you have O&M, debt service, and capital costs for 2026. These include part of the cost for the design of the treatment plan. And how are you meeting all those costs? Well, some of it is revenues. This 5.7% increase, that's going to add 1.5. You have miscellaneous revenues, some of which include expectation of grants. You're going to use some of the reserve that you have to cover this, and development revenues that are expected to be about 7.2%. So all of your revenues are met by, all of your costs are met by all these funding sources, and that's how we cover the cost at the end of the day. So with that 5.7, we presented last time several scenarios of how to achieve that, and the one we recommend, which kind of balance things out, is doing the across the board increase, 5.7%. You will see 5.7% increase every level of usage. As you use more dollar-wise, you'll pay more increase, but it will be a 5.7% for all of the classes in sewer. So that's really, I kind of like it, because usually when you do across the board, it's really simple to explain, and it's really just the same percentage for every customers. We presented kind of a couple of different scenarios last time, but this is the one that to me makes more sense, and you balance the impact across customers the same way. So next, based on that, these will be the rates for the next 3 years, at least for purpose of putting in the code, will be 5.7 in 2026, 5.7 in 2027, 4.3 in 2028. Again, all of them across the board for sewer. So that's on the sewer side. Next, for water, one of the things that, and I've presented this graph before, in order to meet all of those O&M costs that we're expecting to grow. Again, your biggest bill is Harper Valley. We expect that to grow by 5%, and to have enough to pay that service and some of the capital, we are projecting at 6%, but mainly to make sure that those changes in that position start becoming positive around 2031, and kind of make water self-sustained at that time. Debt service coverage is also expected to grow as no new debt is expected, but we expect kind of that 2026, where there's a large payment of debt, to be really close, but then it will go up. That's the plan on water for the 6%. How do we meet that 6% on water? One of the things that we have, again, revenues and expenses. We're meeting all of these expenses, $14 million in O&M, 1.4 in debt service, and the capital cost with revenues from existing rates. The increase are going to generate about 1.3. Then we have reserve and miscellaneous. It's going to cover some. In water, we assume no growth, so there's no expected revenues from development fee, and that's how you're meeting your 6% increase in costs and funding sources. For water, we have one thing, is that the irrigation customers, when we did a cost of service, we realized that they're being paying, their existing revenues are less than 50% of what they should be paying. And part of that is because irrigation customers tend to be seasonal. They put some peaking usage for the system. If you didn't have irrigation, that seasonal usage, you could design a smaller system and be fine with it. So when you start assigning costs, you realize that because of their peaking, they tend to cost more. Also, you have a lot of fixed costs, and they don't pay fixed service charge all the year. So, and you could say like, well, why wouldn't they pay if they're not using? That's true, but the fixed costs for the utilities are almost there. So when you calculate kind of how much it costs in them, you end up with a deficit. So part of what we proposed was to adjust their increase, still generating overall 6%, but adjusting irrigation by 12%. And actually everyone else will get about 5.6%, 5.57, but 5.6%. So, and in this case, across the board makes a lot more sense, because majority of your costs are actually variable. That Harper Valley bill is completely based on usage. So you should try to put some of the increase, or some of the increase on those rates towards volumetric too. So it's going to be an across the board. As you use more, you will pay more, but it's still going to be for every class except irrigation, 5.57. We have here kind of two scenarios of how to achieve this. So on the next slide, we have, you can do 12 for irrigation and then just keep it across the board 6. That's one option. Everyone else in 2026 and 2027 will be 5.57. Or the other one was doing at 12%, the next slide, 12%, 6% across the board, and then 12% again for irrigation. Some ways irrigation, based on the cost that they're generating, that 12% will get you close to their cost of service. And because in general irrigation is usage that is completely, now I forgot the word, but on irrigation they can always change that usage, because in some ways it's for lawns, for usage that is not for important things, or for indoor house usage and indoor plants and all of that. You can usually apply a higher increase, but you have to be careful on their usage. So that's the other option that we propose. This will get you very close to the cost of service, and again, after those 3 years, you can always review. 3 years, I think, is a good period to see the impact that might have on irrigation side. You expect usually that they will change some of their pattern, but usually what you see maybe is like a 1% reduction. And in my experience, weather can give you that even more in any given year, besides just the effect of the increases. So that's on water. Again, two kind of options, 12, 12, and 6, or 12, 6, and 12. This is kind of where you are in 2025 and what the proposed 2026 are going to look like. Again, we don't know what the other utilities are going to do. We expect Harper Valley to do 5% in general, but I didn't incorporate that. Just leave you what currently where you are and where you are going to be in 2026 if everything else stays the same. But you're probably going to end up in the same place because everyone else is increasing the rate. So this is at 1,000 gallons, water and sewer. If you see, because 1,000 is included, what you're getting is $1.50 and $1.20, $1.15 in sewer and $1.20 in water. And then at 6,000 gallons, kind of the same. The change is a couple of dollars more, but keep you compared to other utilities around the same level. So that's pretty much it. So summarize, and that's the proposed rates for the next 3 years based on that scenario.
You covered a lot of material. Vice Mayor?
Yes, sir. Thank you. If you would, when you were on, I think it was slide 13, and you were talking about the 12%. You made a comment, and you talked about you were talking about the irrigation.
Yes.
And you were talking about the weather and how the weather can have a positive impact if we have lots of rain. But then sometimes we have no rain, and then we have a drought. And then
Yes.
if the city places water restrictions on those irrigation customers, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and that's usually when you are facing maybe a drought. There's usually you have kind of a tool in your arsenal for water rates, which is you might go into drought restriction, but drought rates too, which is kind of a different analysis, but it's one that some utilities have. So when they go to like, okay, we're gonna go to drought stages, you kind of know how much you might lose in water sales. So what you do is, and honestly, this is something that no utility wants to run, but you have to have it sometimes in your back pocket, is that either you plan and see, okay, how much can we use of or draw down our reserves to cover this year, or sometimes just go to drought rates, which is, it is a rate that tries to recover the revenue loss. And look, it's something that sometimes it's necessary to do, but no one really likes it because they're saying, well, you're charging me and asking me to use less, but now you're charging me more. And the truth is that's true. But it's so the utility can cover that. And that's really when you go into a drought. That's a completely different analysis we really didn't do, but that's one that sometimes you need to have and look at it and see what that's impact. The problem with usually drought is that you don't know how long it's going to take. Sometimes it's 1 year, so maybe 1 year you just approve or just don't do anything, just bite the bullet, reduce your some of the cost. In water, In your case, the benefit is that because you're buying so much for Harper Valley, your costs are variable, so that you're in a better position than utility that maybe have 80-90% of their costs fixed. So in that case, it's good. Let me tell you just a quick story. When I was in the city of Aurora, one of the last things we did was create and go to a drought stage and implement drought rates. And we had to do it kind of early in the year because the reservoirs were going down. And you need about 90 days to teach people, explain, and do all of that. Well, we implemented the rates kind of in March. Well, April was the highest historical rain. And the reservoirs went back, and people were so mad, and they were just complaining to everyone. And we were like, but how do we know that we're going to have the highest historical rain in 1 month and solve everything? Sometimes you wish for that, but you have to prepare for the worst. But yeah, that's the thing. But the other thing is, a rainy summer or rainy spring can be as bad too to your revenues, because then you have people not irrigating. So you have to always be aware and looking at how your revenues are coming and planning and keep track of all of that on a regular basis.
Okay. I asked a question because I believe in the past 2, if not 3 consecutive years, we've had to have some type of city drought restrictions put in place.
Yeah. Okay. And in Colorado, many utilities, just the normal is drought stage 2, where you only do like 2 days a week irrigation. But yeah, that's.
So fortunately, do I need to turn this on? Okay. So fortunately for us, all of our droughts are shorter, and then we kind of go out of that, at the end of the year when we get into the rainy season. So we've not had to implement rate structures like that. I think what Fernando was saying though is if we were to experience that, it would be another kind of level that we would have to look at. But the sizing of our system has to be is larger to accommodate all of the irrigation demands that we see during the summer, which can be peaked, based off of rainfall or not. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah.
Ready to move on? All right, next item. Item 8 is follow-up discussion regarding possible funding options for the purpose of assisting Franktown Open Hearts with the required stormwater improvements in conjunction with the development of the new facility proposed for northeast corner of Johnson Circle and Granberry Street.
So you would ask us as a follow-up from the last meeting to identify funding sources. There are really 3 potential funding sources that you can look at in our judgment. Community Development Block Grant, which had been talked about before. We also have the County Adequate Facilities Tax funding that we have a fund balance there that has been used in the past for some infrastructure costs, lots of times around schools and other county facilities. So this might be is an eligible window there. And then of course your general fund or general dollars. One important component for us would be the opportunity to spread it over multiple years. That's something we've asked of the Franktown folks, our ability to spread that cost out over time. And that would be something that would help us manage this and identify the relative share. And I would put these in that order. I would really look at CDBG and the county facilities tax as your first options, and then have your general fund dollars be a last resort to fill any voids. And the more we're able to do this over, say, 2 or 3 years, that helps us fit this with other priorities that we're balancing within those funds. Vernon, I don't know, we put this attachment that sort of gave you those numbers in terms of eligible dollars. I don't know if you want to walk through those specifically.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, Mayor and Aldermen. As Eric summarized, and this information before you, looking at the top box, it shows the CDBG funds that we've been awarded from 2022 to 2024, and it shows the balance as of the last month. And that balance that's available to 2024 is is almost $258,000, as you can see in the bolded text following that paragraph. And then the following 3 years, 25 through 27, it's just a projection of what our award would be, and what would be committed would be continuing our emergency repair program that Habitat for Humanity is taken on, and then the administrative fee that jurisdictions that are entitlement communities in the CDBG program are able to draw down, and that would leave a balance for each of those years if that program's continued by HUD and the federal government, of about an additional $198,000 a year. So then after 2027, we'd have about $594,000 available. And then you can see below that we do get requests. And the Franklin Housing Authority has indicated an interest for some funds for their Schwanee development. And then, of course, we're working on the Hill, and now we have Franktown Open Hearts request. Now, those funds just don't sit in a pool. We draw those down from the federal government and have to use them within a time period. So when we have requests, we can use them, and that gets to Eric's point that if it's the board's desire, number one, to support Franktown, and if the desire is to use CDBG funds when they're available, and then fill in as needed if they're not available based on some other requests that are likely to come before you, then using facilities tax would be a fallback position, and then the general fund after that. But hopefully that lays out the funding that's available should you want to proceed with going forward. And we would write that into a development agreement, because it's always hard to know exactly when the requests for reimbursement will be made. When we have infrastructure, the infrastructure needs to be installed, inspected, approved, and tested, and then accepted. And then when we receive the invoices for that work, then we make the reimbursement. Which means drawing down the funds from HUD or using other funding that's identified. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a good analysis that you've done and helped us understand the financial impact. I'm still struggling a little bit to understand the project, because last time it was $6 to $7 million, and in the letter that we received, it's $9 million. So that's a big question mark in my mind. What is the cost of what they're doing? I did ask the question last time about how much money they had to have before they started the project, and I didn't see that in the letter. And then I'm confused about the October deadline to start the project. Is that a bank requirement, or is that a requirement of the county? We talked to Mayor Anderson today, and I don't think he's imposed that restriction, so it might be helpful to get a few answers about that, and we can do that offline if all the rest of the board is happy with the project. But
we can answer some of those questions.
You
or
better
we can do it offline.
come over to the mic, please.
Okay, well, please.
We can
Bridget.
answer some of those questions now, but if we want to do it offline, because I know you all
No,
are
we're
running short on time.
We're going to allow some time, because I know that's important.
Okay, the number for construction, we just recently got our design development budget back. Obviously, we are still in the design process, so it's not completely refined. We're not going to a construction GMP, is just over 9 million. One of the differences in those costs is the original number did not include all the work for Johnson Circle, so that adds a significant amount to our budget. We've also allotted a contingency fee in there and escalation fees just based on past experiences. So that 9 million still is subject to change based on where we are in design, and just trying to project as best we can. And I think one thing, the cost though of the Johnson Circle work is still around the 790,000 that we're predicting, and it would be one of the first things to go. And according to our schedule that we have put in, based on our design and working with the city staff of when our submissions could take place, we anticipate breaking ground at the end of September, and the Johnson Circle work would be the first to start, along with the site work of the construction in the building. And Steve is here as a board member and can help answer questions regarding fundraising and cost on hand.
I think my question is why is the deadline October of 25? Who's imposing that
So
deadline?
that is a lease requirement imposed by Williamson County. And we have gone back to them once already and gotten that extended. And that is where, at this point, without going before them for another extension, we are required to start work by October of this year.
Interesting.
Mayor?
Alderman Barnhill? Well, I'm elected. No, I'm done.
Another question that we had 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, how does this group, how does Franktown interface with Boys and Girls Club, Gentry Foundation, some of the other organizations that are to a certain extent doing the same thing? And also the numbers, when you had 1,800 kids that you could go to and get them, but you only had 180 and you only had a waiting list of 30, what I asked for, I thought, was that information should have went to the city administrator, and he should have that tonight to answer those questions, because that's one of the things that, you know, if we've got, I'm looking on here, now that, when you talk about facilities tax, county's facilities tax is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes, the city's portion, yes, and those are the unobligated funds that we have available.
The 198,000. Times
No,
three.
2.779 million we have available.
You wanna have a shot at that?
If I can remember all the questions, yes, I'd be happy to. Yes, there are 1,800 to 2,000 students that qualify. We only worked with about 170 last year because we are working out of borrowed facilities, churches, library, ag center, etc. We can only accommodate a certain number of kids, plus we have to transport these kids to all the different sites. We have limited transportation. We have about 8 buses. So we're about at capacity of how many kids we can transport and fit into these borrowed facilities. Whether if it was our facility, we could have more kids more often, with more frequency. Yes, we have a limited number of kids on our waiting list because we require parents to fill out a lot of paperwork, submit forms, jump through a lot of hoops, and if they know there's not going to be any openings between now and the summer, they're not going to do it. But when we reopen, we have more applications than we can get to. We keep a list of kids on a wait list, but because again, the parents aren't necessarily going to do a lot of work if they know it's pointless, we don't ask them to be candid. But we get 2-3 calls every single week from families wanting their kids to be in our program, and we have to say, we're full.
Well, the reason that I asked that is because the 2 organizations that I mentioned are on our appropriations. They're on our budget. We haven't looked at that portion of the budget yet, but I suspect we'll get to it at our next budget meeting. And there's, I guess, 10 or 12 organizations that we support. Certainly not the $900,000. So I'll say that. But I was just looking because when they come in and make a presentation to us, they're saying some of the same things that you're saying. After school activities, tutoring activities, other activities, I'm sure, I don't know what all of them are, but I asked that, and I want to know what the interface, how you connect do you have any dealings with them? Do you ever meet with them? Do you ever have any discussion with anybody from the Boys and Girls Club? Or
Absolutely. In fact, we have 12 or 14 of our kids that are dual
okay.
enrolled.
That's what I wanted to hear.
We have children, I think 8 that are participating in the Gentry education thing. But our tutoring on Monday nights, Tuesday nights, we'll have 40 to 50 kids. Monday nights, elementary and middle school. On Tuesday nights, about the same number. In education, computer classes, homework assistance, they're all vital to our programs. But what they don't do is all the vocational training, all the exposure to arts, music, dance, culture, et cetera, our program is so much more comprehensive. This is not a pejorative or negative against their programs. They're phenomenal, and they specialize in these things. We are much more holistic. We prepare kids to launch, to break that cycle of poverty. Have I covered everything?
Yeah, if I could just say something real quick. Thanks everybody for the time. Steve Scott, board member. Franktown, in the time I've been on the board, last 5 or 6 years, it's just one of those organizations that started with somebody taking kids to a gym and has just tremendously grown. And we're in a season of Franktown and going into another generation. We just have been operating, out of the back of a trunk, basically, with our busing the kids to different locations and those kind of things. So the synergies between all those groups, I really honestly feel like that they're going to be there even in a greater synergies with the facility. When we have a facility, we just have been operating with the borrowed facilities. The structure is there, the facility's not. So I think that's kind of limited our involvement with some of those that you mentioned. I wanted to also mention that y'all had some wonderful, kind remarks about Franktown. We appreciate that. I watched the replay, and Mary, you had some specific questions to end that session. And we did respond with a letter last week on those. The board got together and responded specifically to those regarding financing and our capital campaign, which I chair. And so a lot of those are in a document. I don't know if you all have had an opportunity to read that. Okay. Has that answered your question, Mr. Barnhill?
Well, I think my point was, I don't think the letters answered all the questions I had last time.
Okay.
And I think one of my worries is that you start the project in October, and then you're unable to raise the rest of the money to continue the project forward, and then that just sits there for a long time. So
yes, sir.
But I'm a huge fan of what Franktown does. I've been very familiar with it for many years, and you're making a big difference in a lot of kids' lives. But $900,000 is not chump change. It's a lot of money,
we all took your questions at the end as if this was potentially awarded, it could potentially sit there. We did not raise the money, but we did and do have financing, and have been working with a bank for financing for different levels as we go through the final part of our campaign. $1 million.
That was one of the questions I asked.
It's $1 million, or it's $2 million, $3 million, and $4 million financing with one of our board members, who's at Fourth Capital Bank. So, can I read just a quick?
So you got enough money now to finance the whole thing?
We have half of our goal. We've got 6 months left in our capital campaign, and then we're prepared. Because of the groundbreaking deadline, we're prepared to then go the financing route.
Well, we're going to be good on groundbreaking because we got 2 this week. So
yeah.
Well, I won't belabor my questions anymore.
Well, I had summarized to answer the financing question. If you want me to read that, as is typical, part of finalizing the financing requires a review of construction documents for underwriting, review of the terms of the contractor's contract, and confirmation of contractor's guaranteed maximum price amount. We're still finalizing the design and have just started the value engineering process. We're close to obtaining our GMP amount and construction documents, which is what the bank will ultimately require for financing. We've been in discussion with Fourth Capital Bank about potential lending on this project, and while it's too early for a full commitment from them, they are favorable of this project and would be inclined to lend to our new home for Franktown. As due diligence and in preparation of potentially needing to secure a loan to round out our capital campaign fundraising, 3 loan scenarios have been provided to us from Fourth Capital in the amounts of $2 million, $3 million, and $4 million. So we are at least educated at this point as to what can be expected regarding interest rate, loan fees, closing costs, interest-only payments during construction, and permanent mortgage payments. The lender has assured us that once GMP is established and accepted, the financial process will be complete by the end of September in time to break ground in October. Fourth Capital Bank Senior Vice President and Commercial Relationship Banker Travis Stumke is a member of our board of directors.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was my question before. Alderman Baggett, you have the last comment, and then we need to.
I needed to clear up. I sent an email to the board in order to make sure that I got that out in the public. Blind copied you all, but a few things. Number one, facilities tax sounds like a great option. This is a county-owned parcel. Now, you're leasing this, right?
Yes, sir.
Ground, yes.
Long-term lease.
Yes.
Now
Dollar a year
that
for
structure, the structure when it's complete, Franktown's not going to. It reverts back to the county, I guess, if they didn't extend it, right?
Correct.
After 40 years, yes.
40 years, right? So okay, so this is not benefiting. We're not paying $780,000 so that Franktown gets to build a building that they build equity in. They enhance their financial position. This is coming back. This is a government-owned piece of property. Eventually, will be. I hope Franktown's here in 40 years and for 40 more. But after that, if it's not, it's a government-owned building by the citizens who are paying these facilities taxes. We're improving a county parcel. I made mention in my email. We are allowing, this is going to happen no matter what in this area. We got a $40 million, $30 million project on West Main Street for improving sewer on the west side of town, improving stormwater in legacy neighborhoods. We do it all the time in these legacy neighborhoods. We do it all the time. And we have 2 organizations, the Franklin Housing Authority, that we do this on a regular basis for. Look, they're asking for $600,000. Are we looking at them and saying, out of the CDBG funds, we're not looking at these nonprofits and saying, no, these are actually, this is a synergy that exists, unlike any other option. By the way, if you're wondering if we're preferential to other nonprofits, we gave $25,000 to the Boys and Girls Club last year. We gave $33,000 to the community child care. We gave Gentry's got $24,000 from us, and I can keep going. And they've been doing this for years. They've been receiving these funds, and it's just like it's somehow, and we're going to improve low income. Look, we're looking at building houses on someone's land for city employees. And an existing partner that we have that does affordable housing in our community right now and is going to improve Johnson Circle and build more, and this is going to be something they need to have happen, and we're struggling on how to do this. I'm not saying it needs to be the full 900,000, but it's like we can't figure out a synergy when we see it. And I know there's good reasons. I respectfully might disagree with some of y'all, but I don't know why these synergies that exist. We're improving a county's piece of property. That's exactly, when you talk about the city county facilities taxes and budget and finance, Michael, we typically use, I'm not going to use your, do your voice because you have an exceptional voice, and it's very eloquent, but we use these funds to improve things that are adjacent or on county parcels of land. Is that right? I probably didn't say that.
You can use it for anything.
We can use it for anything, but
from
that
a
is our
policy
tradition.
standpoint, you've used it for infrastructure around county schools, around other schools too. And then we also, we made a contribution to the enrichment center when that was being developed. So we have tried to have a synergy related to the county. That's been a policy choice, but actually you can use it in any means you would like.
I don't want us to change the policy choice. We just have a nexus right here sitting in front of us where a county parcel, we can kind of kill a lot of birds with one stone. I'll stop there, but I think we would, need to continue looking at this. I'm not saying we have to do the whole 900,000, although I think we should. And I have the same concerns the mayor has of when we commit to this, so you all can start. I think there should be some conversations had with the county on your lease. Make sure we're working with a firm deadline. If it's not a firm deadline, we need to know that. But it is very important. This is important to our community. The synergies exist. And we're going to take over it's our infrastructure. That is a central role of us as government. And if
I've
we're
got
not
Alderman Berger wants to make a
Thank you,
quick
Mayor.
comment
Appreciate
before
it.
we leave.
I just want to ask, what are the parameters of tapping into any reserve funds for a portion of this? Since Alderman Baggett made some great points of how this could be used and is used in the future for that infrastructure.
I think that would be your last resort. I think we've given you 2 other options that have adequate dollars there to meet the request. The other question I think that would be helpful for us to get an answer on is our ability to spread it over multiple budget years. We just need to, if the extent we're able to do that, that helps us. But there's dollars outside of that. I would not tap your reserves to support this
No,
project. I think you have
question.
other options that
Yeah, just a question.
would fit.
All right, thanks.
All right, we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Could I add one comment to the lease, just for clarity on the lease that you're talking about with the land? There is in that lease a requirement at the end of 40 years that if the property is not needed, that's on us to demo the property and put it back as is. So that's part of the lease agreement that we have.
All right.
Thank you all.
Just one other comment. The county has owned that property since 2008, probably. I'm not sure why they would hold your feet to the fire to be able to start something in October or November.
Other people want.
Well, the other people, they've already committed to you, and I don't understand. I would go back to the county and ask for an extension. If you feel squeezed here,
Yes,
then
sir. We don't know for sure that they will. We've gone back for an extension and we were given that, kind of in the 1 more year kind of thing.
Okay.
But we don't know that for certain. But yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, we'll be back in here in 10 minutes.
Thank you.